All right, so now that we've managed to get our program to encode some text, it's time to do the opposite direction, which is how do we get our program to be able to decode a piece of text based on a shift number? So let's say that we try to decode the letter G and we had a shift number of 3. Well, in this case, we actually have to work backwards and shift backwards in the alphabet in order to get the letter that's 3 spaces previously. So in this case, that would be D. Go ahead and head over to Caesar Cipher to start and fork your own copy of it. All right, so we've got all the code that we had at the end of part 1, but now we have to create the decrypt function. And the decrypt function is again going to take the text that the user inputted and the shift number, and both of these are going to go into the function as inputs. And then inside the function, we're going to shift each letter of the text backwards in the alphabet by the shift amount. For example, if we started out with this code and we needed to shift each letter by 5, then we end up with the plain text hello, and finally our function needs to print the decoded text is, depending on what it is that we actually got. Finally, to do part 3, we're going to use that direction variable that we ignored previously, where we ask the user to type encode if they want to encrypt and decode if they want to decrypt. And then we're going to use an if statement here to check which one they chose, and then we're going to call the corresponding function based on that direction. And once you've completed all 3 to-dos, you should be able to run your program and encode a message as well as decode a message when you hit run again. Like that. Have a think about how you might tackle each of the 3 to-dos and then pause the video and give it a go. All right, so how did that go? The first part should be quite easy. All we have to do is define a new function called decrypt, and this decrypt is going to take the same inputs as our encrypt, which is the text and the shift that the user entered. But again, I'm going to use some different parameter names to be able to differentiate the argument and the parameter. So in this case, because the text that I'm getting is going to be scrambled, I'm going to call the first parameter cipher text. And the second parameter, I'll call it again the shift amount. Now, after a colon, I'm done with to-do 1. Now let's move on to to-do 2. So here, I have to be inside the decrypt function, so indented inside the function. And then I'm going to shift each letter of the cipher text backwards in the alphabet by the shift amount and then print out the decrypted text. To do that, I'm again going to need a for loop, and I'm going to loop through each letter in the cipher text. And for each of those letters, what I want to do is I want to get hold of the position that they are in the alphabet. So I'm going to check the alphabet and then use again that index function and then tap into the position of the letter. Once I've got the position, I'm going to define the new position, which is going to be the current position. Now, remember, we're moving backwards in the alphabet now, so I'm going to subtract the shift amount from the position. Once that's done, I can define a blank variable called plain text, which is just going to be an empty string. And once I've gotten hold of each of the new positions, I can add to that plain text by tapping into the alphabet and then getting hold of the letter at the new position. So now finally, once that for loop's completed, then I can print out the result, and I'm going to use the same sort of output structure as I've got in the example, and we're going to replace that hard-coded text with the plain text that we've decrypted. And finally, I just have to turn this into an F string so that it actually gets inserted. Now, the last thing I have to do is the to-do number 3. So here, we're actually going to check the direction variable. And we're going to see that if it's equal to encode, well, then we're going to call that encrypt method that we had previously, so indented inside the if statement. But else if the direction was actually equal to decode, well, in this case, we're going to call our newly created decrypt function. And we're going to pass in the ciphertext as the text, and the shift amount is going to be equal to the shift. So once again, these arguments come from up here when we ask the user to input those values. And now it should go over to the decrypt function and do everything that's inside to decrypt the text. So now let's give our program a run and just make sure that it works as expected. So I'm going to encode our message hello, shift it by 5, and then I'm going to run it again, and I'm going to try and decode this message now. So I'm going to type decode, and I'm going to paste in that message we had before, and type the same shift number, and now we've got our text decoded. So that's how you solve step 2 of our project. Have a review of the code here, and once you're ready, head over to the next lesson, and we're going to cover part 3 of the Caesar Cipher. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.